So to finish, let's talk about the FA Cup third round. All games are live on ESPN Plus in the United States this weekend from Thursday through to Monday. And obviously the tie of the round is Arsenal versus Manchester United. The holders United against the record winners of the competition, Arsenal. So huge game. James, what do you think about Arsenal's perspective? Is it a game that they are desperate to win? They haven't been past the fourth round since they won it in 2020, I don't think.
No, and you know, Arteta's sort of been on record saying that he feels that this team needs to win trophies on a regular basis to sort of establish themselves as you know, really validate what they've been doing and the progress they've made in the last 5 years. However, you know, it isn't a priority for them. They are still going in full competitions. They obviously still feel they can win the Premier League. They've got the Champions League. They've got a tricky run of games actually coming up after the United game. So while they will take it seriously, I still think they will rotate 2 or 3 positions at the least, and feel that given United's general level, they'll have enough to get through.
Rob, United are the holders, but it's a pretty tough first game to defend their crown. So third round Arsenal away, is it a priority for Amorim, or is he going to save his place for the Premier League game against Southampton next week?
Well, he has spoken about knowing the value of a trophy, and I think he realises that to win something would kind of buy him a lot more time. But then we saw against Spurs in the Carabao Cup that he played Bayindir and not Onana. He made some changes. I think he went with a weakened or a weaker team at Tottenham than perhaps a lot of fans that were expecting. You've referenced at the Southampton game there that they are still in a sticky situation in the Premier League, and they've got a game against Southampton at home on the Thursday, and then Brighton, I think, at home on the Sunday. It's a massive game against Arsenal in the Cup, but you would argue in United's situation that the Southampton and the Brighton games are bigger for Amorim and Man United. I think though that you need to show something at the Emirates, given the fuss he made of the performance at Anfield. You can't make such a big deal of the performance against Liverpool and then pick a weakened team to get well beaten against Arsenal. He needs to start building some momentum. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of team he picks. I think sort of all options are open.
I think one thing about the FA Cup that makes it so special is the fact that there's going to be a huge away following at all these grounds. There might be 9,000 United fans at Arsenal. There's going to be,
if they can get a train.
If they can get a train, that's a very kind of UK issue.
Yes.
But so, what are the storylines this weekend that are interesting to you? I mean, Rob, what's your standout cup tie this weekend?
Well, aside from Stockport County, my hometown team, obviously going to beat Palace away and cause a massive cup upset. Salford playing City, obviously for obvious reasons. Salford owned by the class of '92. They've been stuck in League Two for a while. I think people assumed that because of the backing they had with Gary Neville, Paul Scholes, Nicky Butt, Ryan Giggs and the rest of them, that they would kind of shoot through the leagues. It's not really happened. They've got stuck in League Two and ended up kind of having to sack and appoint different managers. They are on a good run at the moment. They've won the last 6 games, third in League Two, so right in the promotion race to get promoted to League One. Obviously, I don't think anyone really is expecting them to go to Man City and win, because Pep Guardiola likes picking strong teams and sees the value in long cup runs, where it's the Carabao Cup or the FA Cup. But it's a nice story, isn't it? The class of '92, United's class of '92 coming up against Man City and Pep Guardiola. And, like you say, magic of the FA Cup, you never know.
James?
Well, it's got to be Tamworth for me. I think the lowest ranked team left in the competition, and it's just a quintessential FA Cup tie, isn't it? A team like that for hosting a Premier League powerhouse, Tottenham, and the absolute worst possible game really for Ange Postecoglou. You can only lose. If they win, they're expected to win. There's no real benefit from it. They're through to the next round. But if they lose, my word, the pressure will be under them will be immense.
I was at that stadium. Well, the stadium's probably a bit too strong. Ground about 3 or 4 years ago. It was the first game that Wrexham had under their Hollywood ownership of Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds. And one thing that struck me was the size of it. But the ground is called the Lamb. Now, FA Cup is all about story tales and romance and lambs to the slaughter, all this sort of thing. I mean, it really has got nightmare written all over it for Ange Postecoglou and Tottenham. But I think the story that I'm looking forward to this weekend is Liverpool against Accrington Stanley. It's a game that people of a certain vintage in the UK will remember.
Do it, come on, do it.
No, I'm not doing it.
Do it.
A famous advertisement for TV commercial for milk back in the late 80s, early 90s.
What was the line, Mark?
Well, 2 kids in Liverpool shirts were saying that Ian Rush, Liverpool's greatest goal scorer at the time, said that if you didn't drink lots of milk, you'd only be good enough to play for Accrington Stanley. Prompting the response, Accrington Stanley, who are they? Exactly. I'm not doing the accent. No. Not from Manchester doing a Liverpool accent. But that story kind of actually helped Accrington as a club rebuild. Back in the 1960s, they went out of business. They went out of business and liquidated and ended up in the non-league. And in the late 80s, early 90s, the club was really, really struggling to have a future. What they actually earned a little bit of money from that commercial. They created a cult following on the back of it. And about 10, 15 years later, they regained their place in the Football League to the point where they've never lost it since. And this is the first time they've played Liverpool since that famous advert. It's only the second time ever. But also, Accrington is not far from Liverpool, and virtually all of their team is made up of Liverpoolians. They're a team that generally, since they were promoted back to the Football League 20 years ago, has basically based itself on players that didn't make the grade at Liverpool or Everton and just basically moved to Accrington to kind of relaunch their careers. So they are a team full of Scousers playing at Liverpool, at Anfield. It's a dream game. It's a game that will raise perhaps over £1 million for Accrington in terms of their finances. So that is what the FA Cup is about in many ways, that the smaller clubs that just look for this kind of almost like pot of gold at the end of the rainbow playing Liverpool away or Man United away. So Accrington standing at Liverpool for me is a really big occasion. But I think you've both got some of your favourite FA Cup stories. I think we'll start with you, Rob.
I think we're going to start with James. James has been telling this story off camera, so it's time.
Well, the story that springs to mind is Sutton 0, Arsenal 2 from February 2017, which is a game that lingers in the memory for Wayne Shaw, the Sutton goalkeeper, eating a pie on the touchline that in a bookmaker stunt that ended up getting him a fine and a ban. Yeah. So, but the reason that I remember it is because obviously as a non-league club, their media facilities are sort of thin on the ground, and after the game, Wenger basically had to have his post-match press conference kind of on the pitch, but because the fans were still milling about, and obviously there's not the sort of same level of security at a ground like that, they took him into the tunnel and they said, right, there's only room down there for a couple of journalists to come down and do it, so let's grab a couple of people, come down and do it, and share the quotes to everyone else. And me and a colleague went down, and I was stood with my colleague Mark and Arsene Wenger. We were, very, very close together, right in the corner of this tunnel next to the Sutton dressing room. And it had come at a time when Wenger was under almighty pressure at Arsenal. He was, the fan base was divided. He was, he didn't look particularly well. It was really taking its toll on him. But honestly, as the Sutton players were coming out of the dressing room and sort of, they went to turn right and they looked left and suddenly they saw Arsene Wenger stood there and they were like, oh, went back, got their phone, couldn't I have a picture? Yeah, sure. Oh, could you sign my shirt? All this stuff. Wenger's face lit up, the colour came back into his face. He looked, 10 years younger. That was the magic of the FA Cup right there for me.
My favourite stories are always about how the lower league teams try to press their advantage when big teams visit their stadiums, and you hear stories about lower league teams turning the heating off in the away dressing rooms, taking the flush off the toilets in the cubicles so they can't use the toilet. Blacking out, putting blackout blinds over the windows so the entire dressing room is completely pitch black. And that's part of the kind of the lore of the FA Cup, isn't it? That you get these massive teams who are used to fantastic facilities coming to these small grounds and these small facilities, and the lower league teams obviously doing everything they possibly can to make that advantage count, whether it's leaving the grass on the pitch too long so the better team can't pass the ball, or watering the pitch when it's already muddy to make sure that they can't play properly. It's always the case that these managers come out afterwards, don't they, and moan about it and say it's not right, and it can't be, it's not fair. But it's part of the tradition of the FA Cup. All these big teams struggling at these tiny little grounds.
Yeah, listen, the FA Cup at both ends of the scale, it's got great stories. The one that stands out for me, always stands out for me, is the when Man United beat Liverpool 2-1 in the FA Cup. I think it might be the third or fourth round in 1999. Everybody talks about the treble win that year when Solskjaer scored in stoppage time in Barcelona to win the European Cup. But that game, I think into January that year, Solskjaer scored another injury time winner to win that game against Liverpool in the FA Cup, and it was just a crazy game. And that was a game that really kind of propelled United towards the treble. There were other games, the Juventus game, the Arsenal FA Cup semi-final, the game in the final, but that was a game that really set United on the way. But if you're looking for kind of romance and the FA Cup nonsense, I guess, as writers, I don't know, my view with the FA Cup is if you go into a game that involves a minnow at home to a big club, what you don't want is a surprise. You just want it to be nice and straightforward. No drama, no romance. Just keep it as simple as possible so you can get the job done and get out. And there have been a few occasions where I've been to grounds and there's been upsets at Oldham beating Liverpool one year when the striker was a guy that was best mates with Jack Whitehall, the comedian. He was about 6'7", and he was the story was about this guy Matt Smith knowing Jack Whitehall, this comedian. I was at Mansfield one year when Luis Suarez scored a handball goal to get a result for Liverpool, and I was sat in the stands with the laptop on my knee, cramped up, having just had a hernia operation 2 weeks before, so that was almost went back in hospital. But I remember as a young freelancer being sent to Southport versus Notts County. Southport were non-league, and it was 2-0 to Notts County at half-time. Nice and easy, lead team winning the game. 6 paragraphs, 1 order, no problem. Southport managed to turn it around the second half and won 4-2. And there's a guy called Steve Pickford, who I think was a carpet fitter or something like that, scored the winning goal. So I went from having one nice and easy 6-par job to having 11 different newspapers to service. I'll never forget that it was like, well, you go to an FA Cup tie and you could be really, really busy or really quiet and get home nice and early. But that was a day when it told me that the FA Cup can ruin your weekend, basically.